Hey friends, welcome to the podcast. I'm Tony Corpin, publisher of School Transportation News. Want to thank you for joining us today. This episode is brought to you by Trance, the leader in school bus routing software. And our tech tip today is brought to you by Zonar.
And I'm Ryan Gray, Editor-in-Chief of School Transportation News. Want to welcome everybody back from a long holiday weekend. We just celebrated the 4th of July here in the U.S., and our friends up north just celebrated Canada Day. We're going to be joined a little bit later by our good friend Greg Jackson, who is Executive Director of Transportation and Fleet Services for Jefferson County Schools in Colorado. He's going to rejoin us and share how all the planning is going for school startup.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, no, I was talking to Greg earlier as well, and he's telling me how excited his team is about coming to STN Expo Reno, November 1st or the 5th. Get the feeling lots of people are excited. I'm getting lots of emails on that people are coming, signing up for our Transportation Director Summit as well. Gives me confidence that things might be headed in a good direction. You know, fingers crossed. We're kind of get past this coronavirus spike that we're seeing around the U.S. Definitely, it's created some cause for concern, but, you know, let's go with some good news to start the top of the show. Ryan, you want to give us an update on what's cooking?
Yeah, so the private school bus contractors could receive some much needed COVID-19 relief. There was a new bill introduced last month in the Senate, the Coronavirus Economic Relief for Transportation Services Act of 2020. It's a mouthful. Or for short, the CERTS Act. It's a bipartisan legislation that includes school buses among the various passenger-carrying marine vessels and commercial buses, intercity buses, motor coaches, et cetera, to help these companies cover employee wages, leave, and benefits during all these closures, rehire or recall laid off or furloughed workers. Even has some funds there in this $10 billion pot to cover capital costs as well as leases, rents, debt service, and even purchase new equipment such as personal protective equipment and cleaning and disinfecting supplies. So a big reason for this money is, of course, a lot of the CARES Act funding that was enacted into law back in March. That really goes to states, and there's that public education side of things that school bus can stand to really partake in. So not as much money, if any, really, that was available in those funds for school bus contractors. So the National School Transportation Association is putting all of its support behind it, as are the American Bus Association, the United Motor Coach Association, and the Amalgamated Transit Union. We've got some big bats behind this act. We'll see if this goes anywhere. Again, it's bipartisan support and in the Senate, so that could help. But as Kurt Mackison at NSTA pointed out to me last week, there are a lot of competing folks out there that are trying to get money. So this package has some competition. We'll just have to see where it goes. But you can go online to stnonline.com and check out an article that we posted last week to get more information on this.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of grassroots efforts from a lot of those associations and its members trying to really vie for their kind of piece of the pie at the table, right? So they don't get left out of the conversation, because a lot of those contractors' businesses have been significantly impacted by the situation, right? The health crisis and everything has just made the business dry up. Tourism, all those sorts of things. Field trips. I was talking to someone earlier about that. How does that affect the contractors that are doing trips, or anyone doing trips for that matter? It's just that kind of the side of the business is dried up significantly. And, you know, it'll come back at some point once we get this thing under control. But yeah, contractors, they got a lot going on. It seems a couple of school board members in New Haven, Connecticut need an education on how school bus contracting works. Ryan, you want to fill us in on what's going on there?
Well, this has been one of the districts that we've heard about that were not paying their school bus contractors. And several drivers were coming to on our Facebook page over the last couple of months and asking us for updates and, you know, with this CARES Act money, doesn't that mean that school districts are supposed to continue to pay contractors? And we've gone down that road. There's been a bunch of executive orders, including one in Connecticut. But New Haven Public Schools was one of the school districts, of course, that was not paying. Now, about a couple weeks ago, their school board did vote to continue funding First Student, which is the contractor there, albeit at about $1.5 million less than it would normally be owed. They went ahead and okayed about $7 million. So that will definitely help. And that will go toward, of course, some back pay for a lot of the drivers or the other staff that have been furloughed. In the dissenting remarks, two of the school board members that voted against this money, they questioned, well, wait a second, why are we paying them money to ensure their employees are being paid when there was this paycheck protection program? But as we have talked about numerous times, that PPP program is run out of the Small Business Administration. First Student is not a small business. The whole stipulation for those funds is that businesses have 500 or fewer employees. Now, granted, First Student might have less than that just at that location, but certainly they are a multinational company. School bus operations in both the US and in Canada. And of course, their parent company is based over in the UK. So they were not eligible for that money. Some misunderstandings, I think, that's commonplace out there. A lot of folks see a lot of this federal money and they think, it's kind of this one-stop shopping that everyone can go and get it. And that's certainly not the case. Again, there's a lot of education that school bus contractors and the National School Transportation Association has been trying to do with school districts to show them, hey, just because the school buses stop running doesn't mean that we can just stop all transportation operations. There is, even though, a lot of training and the in-person work has stopped, that still has to be ongoing. There still has to be planning for that for when school bus drivers do return. There's, of course, the ongoing maintenance of the vehicles. Those operations just do not halt. Not everybody can just go home and sit there. They have to continue working. And if school districts don't pay, then school bus contractors have to stop all work. And then once again, as we've been talking about, once school restarts again, some of these school districts that aren't paying, they're going to be without school bus service.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. There's definitely a cause and effect to that. And I think that if people think there isn't, they're definitely misinformed, like in this situation. And I'm glad things have kind of worked themselves out. We're definitely seeing a lot of the contractors get back to business in some form or fashion, but there's definitely a lot of uncertainty still out there. And I think as people prepare, Ryan, for school startup, there's definitely a lot of considerations. And technology is a big one. Keeping parents calm, addressing their fears, looking at contact tracing, all the different things that are available. One I mentioned today is Tech Tip, which is brought to you by Zonar, a leader in smart fleet management. Ridership tracking is core at any contact tracing strategy, especially for protecting medically vulnerable students. But it doesn't have to slow down the bus. Zonar's Z-Pass is a touchless solution that digitally captures the date, time, and location of all student riders who get on and off the bus. If someone tests positive for COVID-19, you'll know who shared that bus so you can notify parents that their child was exposed. Learn more at zonarsystems.com/ZPass. That's zonarsystems.com/ZPass. So Ryan, I want to talk to you a little more about some new information that's come out from our friends at Cypress Fairbanks ISD out in Houston. What's the new news there?
Yeah, well, they were part of a National School Boards Association webinar that was produced last week. Karen Smith is the CFO, and Kane Smith is the Director of Transportation. They were both on this webinar. Karen was saying she anticipates that some parents will choose to drive their kids to school rather than put them on the school bus, something that we've heard a lot of other districts talk about. In fact, in our July issue, I write a little bit about this, that unfortunately, more so than in recent years, we really have to come to the realization in the industry that the school bus is just not going to be available for all the kids. And from an equity standpoint, making sure that kids get to school, because that's really the most important thing that we're hearing from health experts to educators, politicians, student transporters, that we need to get continuity back, right? We need to get kids back to school. Parents, they need to get back to work. It's really hard to do that if their kids are at home doing remote learning. Cypress Fairbanks ISD, which is the third largest district in Texas. It's right outside of Houston. They are looking at that to try to alleviate some of the pains on school busing. Another option for Cypress Fairbanks would be to extend walking distances, something that Karen said that they do not want to do, because when they passed a bond a few years ago, that's how, by the way, how Texas school districts fund new school bus replacements. There is no replacement fund per se, that they told the voters, hey, any kid that lives within 2 miles of school if they want to ride the bus, we'll go ahead and service them. That is not the case in a lot of states and a lot of districts, but that's Cypher's decision. Karen said that they're trying everything they can to still be able to do that. But really, it's just indicative of school districts really wringing their hands right now and figuring out what's the best way that they can try to get as many kids on the bus as possible. And those who can't get on the bus, what do they do with them? Cypher is looking at operating some sub-tiers within their existing 3-tier system to try to make up for some of the delays. Something else that they talked about was, frankly, what do we do with the students when they're going to get on the bus? Do we take their temperatures? A lot of districts are trying to figure that stuff out right now. Something that Kane said, I'm hearing from a lot more school districts, and Greg Jackson will get into this a little bit more too, is that there are a lot of concerns about not only forcing school bus drivers to take temperatures and screen symptoms, because that takes away from their main duty, and that's student behavior management, and of course, keeping their eyes on the road and operating the vehicle. Anything that takes away from that, especially at the school bus stop, where we see it's probably the most dangerous part of the school bus ride, that's not good. Student transporters don't want that. So they're really trying to, feel their way through this thing. And another big point that they made was the importance of collaborating with parents. There's a growing sentiment nationwide that parents should be playing a bigger role in ensuring their children's health before they go to school. So engaging them more to make sure the parents are signing off on their kids actually before they even leave the house. Is Junior healthy enough to go to the school, much less get on the school bus? So that seems to be a pretty obvious role that parents should be playing. But student transporters, they see it all every day. They know that a lot of times is not the case. So the concern right now is, the job of making sure that children don't have temperatures or are showing up at the school bus stop. If they are, a lot of districts, including Cypher, they don't want to turn these kids away. So they're really getting creative, working with the parents again, working with other stakeholders at the school district, in the community, local health departments, health experts, school nursing, to try to figure this out and come up with a plan to really adequately address what we know is going to probably be some kids getting sick, although some early stats coming out from other countries are showing that as school has started in Europe, they're not seeing many, if any, COVID-19 cases. Now, again, you could argue that, those could be some smaller population areas than in the US, but really there's just still so much unknown. So that was a big hot topic of this NSBA webinar. And then, of course, this week we're seeing the rollout of this STARTS task force recommendations and these actionable items for school districts. So school districts will start getting a lot more answers very soon.
Ryan, it seems to me with all the unknowns that parents are pushing back. Can you share a little more on what you're seeing out there on that?
Amid all of the concerns, of course, that everybody has about getting back to quote unquote normal, a lot of parents are really questioning, should their kids be going back to school? And, should they be getting on the school bus? It's really dominated for a couple of weeks there last month on the national news. One Saturday morning, I was at breakfast. I was watching, I think, 3 different channels. I was surfing back and forth, and they were all basically talking about the same thing, talking to parents about, do they think it's safe enough for their children to return? And with COVID-19 cases spiking all over the nation, California, we're basically shutting back down again. Our governor has called for restaurants to start closing again. We're seeing that in several other states. So as the economy and as businesses have been reopening, we've just frankly seen some pretty stupid behavior out there from a lot of folks too, of not social distancing. There's COVID-19 parties that I heard about at the University of Alabama, just crazy stuff. But again, what we have to look at is the data. And as I was alluding to earlier, a lot of the early data from some countries is that they're not seeing these big COVID-19 spikes, at least in the schools. They're seeing them elsewhere. So it's again, balancing all that. It's really engaging the parents, addressing those concerns. And one of the things that Kane talked about in the webinar, as well as others, was, again, the importance of reaching out to parents and school districts being that conduit to say, hey, this is what we're doing. These are our concerns. This is what we can and can't do, as well as doing that with the administration, right? Because a lot of these superintendents and school boards are asking for the moon and the stars and the sun, and transportation, they have to get out of the mindset of just being yes, sir, yes, ma'am, about everything. They have to be able to say no. And that's something that Mike Martin from NAPT brought up in the webinar as well. That might also come to a conversation with parents. They might have to say no. And that's just the new normal that everyone's dealing with. Again, it adds to the complexity of this whole restart.
Yeah, with lots of uncertainty, I find it kind of crazy that student transporters are expected to kind of pull a rabbit out of the hat with school startup. It's just, it's a lot to take on. And you need some help out there. And our friends at Trance are coming really close to pulling the rabbit out of their hat. Their new web-based routing solution, Route Finder Plus, is making magic happen for their clients. Plus is critical for today's COVID-19 climate because it allows routers to work remotely with lightning speed, and it allows districts to create as many what-if scenarios as they want. For example, a district deal with how many students they can have on the bus to meet different government guidelines. Then they can flip the switch and activate any of the scenarios they've already created. It does kind of sound like magic. Contact TranceFinder now to see how they can help you reopen school. Email getplus@trancefinder.com and put STN Podcast in the subject line. If you're first from your state to email TranceFinder, they'll give you an Amazon gift card. That's a great deal. That's getplus@trancefinder.com. Coming up next, Ryan Gray and Greg Jackson.
Pleased to be joined once again by Greg Jackson. He was with us several weeks ago on our podcast and is back to inform us about how school startup plans are going for Jeffco Public Schools outside of Denver. Greg is the executive director of transportation for the school district there. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, my friend?
We're hanging in there. Thanks again for joining us. So your guys are a couple weeks out from the start of the 2020-2021 school year. How are things going?
Busy, chaotic. I think like many other people transportation, either contractors or school districts, all trying to put the pieces together, not just from a transportation standpoint, but from a school district in general, trying to get a balance of how you can bring folks back and they stay safe. I guess for me, I think the biggest focus, and also for my district, is having students having the option to be able to come back and have that in-person instruction. The district has really worked hard over the last couple of weeks since the last time we spoke, or last time I've been on a podcast with you guys. And part of it is like we just start working with public health departments within our county. And then the county start working as a collective with all the metro area directors, superintendents, so on, and all been working together and doing a lot of connecting to just start piggybacking off each other on how we are going to make this work.
One of the big things that we've really heard a lot of people right now are rubbing their heads about is temperature checking and symptom checking of students at school bus stops. Can you kind of give us a sneak preview on what you guys are looking to do?
We're looking at where we're going to be going to a bus stop, picking up students. We have some processes in place. From our public health standpoint, we were given the okay to be able to have one student to a seat, 2 per row, starting from row 2. So it increases our capacity a little bit more than where we were with the social distancing of 6 feet, where most times it was zigzagging around 10 to 12 students on a bus, depending on the capacity. So with that, it was now going to a bus stop, picking up students. One of our conversations earlier was talking about doing some testing at the bus stops. One thing we kind of looked at was understanding that it would cost time and add more time to the actual ride to get students to school, especially when you have to add on to the process of, once you get to the school, drop the students off, you got to disinfect, clean, and then return back to that same journey area to pick those students up and bring them back. So for us, the district looked at it at a situation of our concepts and principles about our restart was a focus of place, space, people, and time. And so for us, transportation, those 4 concepts we had to look at from a place, space, people, and time situation. For the place is our school bus. The space that we have within a school bus is spacing students where they have enough distance among themselves. And then at the same time, the place is also where you have fresh air and open windows, or even when you get cold, cracked windows and hatches on top So you can have air circulating, which is very similar to what they're doing in the airlines, but a better option than the airlines option. The airlines have HEPA filters they're putting on and replacing. However, we're doing fresh air and having that option. Our temperature here and how our climate is, we were favorable for quite a while, but then it gets a little cold outside. But Denver is one of those areas that it's maybe cold one day, but then a proper temperature the next day. So putting protocols in place on how many windows we crack to keep airflow and moving around so we can actually transport students. So people, again, was the capacity and having one student per seat, then using the barriers and the high back seats as kind of barriers too, for the students. So they have one student who's also right behind that other student, especially on the elementary level, keeping them safe. And then time. Time was one of the biggest things. The public health directors were really trying to recommend that if we can have students on a bus less than 15 minutes, it would be more probable to say maybe we would increase in capacities. We couldn't promise that, especially when you have a situation of if you're trying to do, temperature checks or things like that. That's only going to add more time to pick up and taking students into school. So temperature checks was something that we kind of are stepping away from potentially. Still haven't been concrete, but I know that it's something that we are now working at doing the temperature check once we get to the school when students are coming off the bus. One, because we're going to be temperature checking as students are entering into every school building. This helps us to be able to work with our school personnel because they're going to be out there trying to temp check the masses. And so when students come off our school buses, we can actually temp check and have those students go through a separate door so they can fast track to get inside the school. And then if we have a student who has a temperature at a certain threshold, our threshold is 100.4 or above, then there's protocols at the schools that are taking place to be able to have those students being escorted into a separate area. Our concerns were more about safety at the bus stop. We have a practice and understanding of we never want to leave a student at a bus stop. So looking at the last couple of weeks is trying to look at how do we do so and strategize that. And one of the strategies is, well, maybe we ask parents to come and make sure they're accompanying their students at a bus stop. As you dissect through that, we had to look at how realistic that can really be in the long term. And part of that was most parents are dropping their students off or telling their students to walk to a bus stop. And they don't have that luxury to be able to go and wait at a bus stop for a student to be picked up before going to work. They have to be to work at time, especially if they're trying to get back to work. We as a district were kind of dissecting through that. We wanted to do everything we could to try to make a decision to say, could we temp check? I think the biggest safety precaution for us was more that if we had a student who had a temperature and a parent wasn't there, what happens? We didn't want to have this situation where we would say, you have a temperature and turn that student away, and then that student has to make their way home. Regardless of the age level or the level of school they are, which is their elementary or secondary level, you just never want to have that situation in place to driver into that situation too, because as you know, drivers are very connected to their students. And the last thing they want to do is send a student away, especially if it's a situation. Even though you want to protect every student on the bus, you wanted to make sure that you can have that student at a safe location.
You want to be equitable and not have them ostracized and turned away, and all the kids are talking and maybe causes some fear with those kids about catching something. But you hit it, I want to expand upon with the driver. One of the concerns I've heard a lot is school districts expecting drivers or the community expecting drivers to be the ones doing these checks when that's not their job. So in this scenario where you're going to go ahead and transport kids to the actual school campus, then you would, ostensibly have like a school nurse or some kind of health professional or some other employee that's actually doing the physical temp checking and screening?
We're going to have our drivers, they'll still be participating in doing temp checks, but they'll be doing it in a role of support to the schools. And so they'll be at the schools, and what would happen is once the students are coming off the bus, and we're going to be having students go off the bus like an airline dismissal. They'll be dismissing from the front to the back and one at a time coming out. And as they come out, we're going to do a temp check, which are temperature check tools that, the thermometers we have. You got a good, roughly, I think, around 3 feet to 4 feet that you have that distance to be able to scan the temperature. So if the student's temperature reads at the threshold or above the threshold, they'll go with the school member to a containment area. At that point is where parents will be contacted and the protocols put in place. The other students will go into a separate location. One, we're just trying to help out, our school communities by working with them where If you have a school of 500 students trying to go through this one door or multiple doors, we have a separate door that we for bus riders. And so what we will do with the bus riders is take their temps, they're cleared, they go through and go directly to their classrooms. So they're not going to have to requeue just to try to go back with a group of folks and get temp checked again. So we understand that teachers need to be in classrooms also. So we got to have some teachers in the classrooms. You can't have every teacher and every staff member outside temp checking because we know that it's going to take a certain amount of time, which could take 45 minutes to an hour. So to expedite that is being partners with our schools by just taking this one step to share with those guys.
How does that affect routing? Have you guys decided what kind of educational model is going to be put into place for the new school year? And then with drivers also helping to scan students as they get off the bus, take their temperatures and whatnot, how does that affect like bell times? What is routing looking like for your folks for the new school year?
Routing is still a work in progress. We have communicated, our district communicated that we're going back 100% elementary. We still haven't made decisions yet on what the actual secondary level is going to be. So we've been partnering with our superintendent's cabinet leads who are overseeing the actual restart, partnering with principals and partnering with a lot of folks who are in the community who are a part of this entire focus. We're building routes right now from a standpoint of 100%, right? But then we understand that we are not going to be able to pick up the capacities. So now we're changing up our attack, looking at it by we have to make multiple loops. So we know that the timing is going to be the most important thing. Schools are going to be partnering with us to open up a little earlier at times, depending. We had some conversations that we can actually work with the schools and maybe have to change some bell times around because of the reasons that we know we cannot get the entire bus population to school within that window that we were usually doing because of the reasons of we have to make multiple loops with that one bus or multiple buses to bring those populations in, especially in some of the schools that we have larger numbers of students. Yeah, I have a middle school that has over 13 buses. So we know that there's a high ridership there. So we have to be very careful in the way of making sure that when we're planning, we're calculating time. And then one thing we're going to do is going to be doing some nice test runs and practices in the month of July, trying to see where we can get times down, practices down. Some of the education is going to happen when we do our in-services before the start of the school year. Our school year was pushed back by a week, so we're now starting the week of August 24th. Our original start date was August 18th. So it gives us more time to work and play with the actual, give our drivers time to run their routes and be able to time the cleanings. We did some practices on cleans already and got our disinfected cleans in between, and we're adding that into our route times. So we have to start doing some trials on that to kind of really test to see how the orders work on that.
Sounds like you and your staff still have plenty of work cut out for you. I'll let you get back to work. Thanks so much for spending a few minutes talking with us and sharing an update.
Hey, anytime. You're getting great information out there to folks. And again, let me tell you something. These podcasts have been great because it's sharing a lot of stuff that we're all in this world of the unknown still. And I call it the new era, the COVID era, that we're learning to adjust ourselves and our lives to it. And right now, while we're in it, we just have to do what we need to do to make sure we're still educating kids and transporting them safely.
Well, we're happy to share your story. Thanks again.
Hey, thank you, Ryan. Don't work too much harder.
It's always great to have our friend Greg Jackson on the podcast. Thank you for those insights and updates. Special thanks once again to our episode sponsors, Trance and Zonar. Reminder that you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. Tell a friend about us too. Also, we love those 5-star reviews. Visit our website, stnonline.com, to stay updated on all the latest news and COVID-19 updates. Also on School Startup. Don't forget to check out our new July issue up on the website today. Till next time, School Transportation Nation, stay safe.